Cześć myszeczki, znacie tę jedną osobę, która mówi wam, że spotka się z wami niedługo, po czym nie odzywa się przez pół roku? To ja. To ja jestem tą osobą. Jak widzicie, od momentu, w którym ostatni raz do was mówiłam, zdążyłam przejść kryzys wieku średniego, tylko że nie jestem w średnim wieku, ale moje życie w ostatnich czasach było naprawdę średnie, więc zrobiłam to, co powinien zrobić przynajmniej raz w życiu każdy człowiek, gdy przechodzi kryzys wieku jakiegoś, czyli zmienić kolor włosów. Ale nie rozmawiajmy o mnie, dosłownie nie rozmawiajmy o mnie, bo ja nie mogę tego znieść w tym momencie. Porozmawiajmy o osobie, której poświęcony jest cały ten materiał i o osobie, którą za chwilę zobaczycie tutaj w rozmowie, czyli o Nealu Shustermanie. Neala Shustermana zapewne większość z was kojarzy jako autora tego fantastycznego dzieła, czyli kosiarzy całej serii Żniw Śmierci, tak naprawdę. Serii, która była wydana kiedyś w Polsce raz przez wydawnictwo Filia, potem na długi czas przez to wydawnictwo zapomniana, a potem stała się hitem, absolutnym książkowym hitem w nowym wydaniu, dokładnie tym, które trzymam w tym momencie w ręce. Neal w swoich pracach i w swoich książkach, warto tutaj też wspomnieć, że nie pisze tylko książek, ale pracuje również na przykład przy produkcji filmów i seriali. Eksplorował już naprawdę każdy możliwy gatunek literacki. Pisze zarówno dla grup młodzieżowych w moim wieku, czyli tej grupy 16+, jak i dla dorosłych, jak i dla dzieci w wieku szkolnym. W swoich pracach podejmuje się również dużej ilości kolaboracji z innymi autorami. Jedna z książek w uniwersum kosiarzy, czyli Pokłosie, jest tak naprawdę zbiorem opowiadań napisanych przez wielu różnych autorów. Jestem ogromną fanką kosiarzy, powiedziałam to Nealowi przed tym wywiadem, ale to właśnie kosiarze skłonili mnie do podjęcia pracy, której podejmuję się nadal, obecnie, mojej pracy w tym wydawnictwie. Pamiętam dokładnie, w jakich okolicznościach czytałam tę książkę. Jechałam autobusem do dentysty. A jedna rzecz, którą po prostu musicie wiedzieć o moim dentyście, to fakt, że jego gabinet wywalony jest na środek jakiegoś pola niczego. Więc jechałam autobusem, który jako jedyny spośród warszawskich autobusów był w stanie mnie tam doprowadzić. Siedziałam na tym siedzeniu, które znajduje się na samym tyle autobusów i czytałam sobie pierwszy tom kosiarzy. Oczywiście cały czas musząc ignorować to, że autobus podskakuje na każdej możliwej dziurze na bardzo wyboistej drodze, która prowadzi do mojego dentysty, a mimo tej wyboistej drogi i mimo tego, że ta podróż była naprawdę bardzo irytująca, zdołałam całkowicie zakochać się najpierw w tym świecie, potem w jego kontynuacji przedstawionej zarówno w Thunderheadzie, jak i w Żniwie, a potem w innych książkach Neala, takich jak Roxy czy Susza. Ogólnie ze względu na to, że pracuję w wydawnictwie, które wydaje kosiarzy, miałam okazję pracować z Nealem naprawdę długo podczas jego przyjazdu i odwiedzin w Polsce. To, co za chwilę zobaczycie, to pierwszy dzień tej pracy i jedyny poświęcony moim mediom, a nie poświęcony mediom mojego wydawnictwa. I to widać. Jakby ja jestem ostatnią osobą, która będzie krytykować siebie, no bo po co miałabym krytykować siebie? Popatrzcie na mnie. Ale widać na tym filmie, że jestem zestresowana i wy też byście byli, come on, to jest Neal Shusterman. Mimo to mam wrażenie, że udało nam się odbyć naprawdę ciekawą rozmowę, zarówno tą, którą za chwilę zobaczycie, jak i później po nagrywaniu, gdy rozmawialiśmy o fanfiction, które ludzie piszą o jego bohaterach. Rozmawialiśmy też o spicy fanfiction, które ludzie piszą o jego bohaterach. Wiedzieliście, że ludzie piszą spicy fanfiction o bohaterach z kosiarzy? W każdym razie bez dłuższego przedłużenia zapraszam was na rozmowę. Uprzedzę, że tak wyjaśniłam Nealowi, dlaczego trzymam w ręce widelec przez całą tą rozmowę. I co? I oddaję ten widelec pewnej blondynie. Many writers say that they never chose consciously to become an author, that it was something that they were meant to do. Do you feel like you chose consciously to become an author, or was it?
It was natural. I just loved storytelling, and it was something that I always did, and something that I did for fun, and I decided that I wanted to earn a living doing that.
Basically, in the last 10 years we had a lot of teen dystopias, especially like the Hunger Games series is extremely popular. But those stories begin from an apocalypse. We enter, as a reader, we enter a world that is falling apart already, and in Scythe, we enter the exact opposite, which is a world that is very collected.
Yes.
Can you tell me about the idea of creating a world that is everything that we basically dream of, because people have conquered death in Scythe?
I was thinking about all of the dystopian stories, and it seemed to me that they were all starting to sound alike. Yeah. And they all have the same trope. The world has gone wrong, and it is up to the main characters, who are almost always teenagers, to have the courage to fix the broken world that their parents couldn't fix. I mean, that describes just about every dystopian novel. And I thought, well, we've seen that. I don't want to just do another version of that. I tend to be a disruptor. I tend to be contrary. I tend to try to do the opposite of what everybody else is doing. So I thought, well, how do I take the genre of dystopia and break it? Okay. What can I do to open it up and look at it in a new way? So I thought, instead of telling a story about the world gone wrong, why don't I do some research as to what a world gone right looks like? Okay. Well, I researched where we're going in medical science, where we're going with AI, and tried to figure out, rather than looking at our worst case scenarios and the things we're afraid of and the things we're worried will happen, looking at all the things we want to happen.
Okay. Did you enjoy writing about consequences?
I always enjoy writing consequences, because even when we get what we want, there are going to be consequences to getting the things that we want. I think all of my stories are always about the unintended consequences of the things that happen in our world. I
think, in general, when people construct a world as complicated as, for example, Scythe, but obviously not only, they tend to get lost in it, especially beginning authors tend to get lost in their works. Do you have any advice for them not to get lost in creation?
My advice is the advice that I wish I would have had when I first started writing, and actually that I did have, but I didn't listen to right at first. And it's hard advice. The advice is, don't start with world building.
Yeah, I agree, definitely.
And my first 2 books that I wrote, big world building books. They were terrible. I never published them. I had a teacher, a professor at university, who said that if I want to really learn how to be a writer, start by exploring different genres, learn how to write stories about people in the real world. And once you have a feeling for that, once you can create characters and once you can tell stories within the real world, then you can start to expand into bringing in elements of unreality. Best advice that I ever got.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. I start with relationships, then characters, then world building, then magic, because I do write fantasy. But I know it's different for every author. Another thing that can serve as an advice for authors, I would guess that you have a lot of stories in your head, and obviously
too many stories.
Yeah, you can't choose to write every single one of them. Do you have like a system that helps you choose which one you want to write and which one you want to publish?
Okay, first of all, I know that you're a writer because you're asking that question.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know what to do after the first series. I'm scared.
How do you choose? That's the thing. There's too many ideas and too many things. For me, there are 4 things that need to come together. First, I have to have a really good idea, but that's not the most important part. It has to be an idea that's original, that feels like I've never seen it before. And they say, well, there's only a limited number of ideas, and I don't believe that's true. Yeah. It's like looking at a piano and saying, well, there's a limited number of songs, there's only 88 keys on a piano. You can come up with new ways of approaching stories. Coming up with something that feels original that I've never seen before, that's one of the things that gets me connected to a story. 3, it's got to be universal. There's got to be something about it that transcends culture, that transcends time. A story that 50 years from now will be just as relevant as it is today. A story that can be read in any language and people will get it because it's about a basic human truth. And so everybody can read that story and feel personally connected to it. And then finally, it's got to be a story that screams to be told, a story that I can't stop thinking about. Stories that keep me awake at night. Because It just keeps running through my mind. So when I have a cool idea that is original, universal, and screaming to be told, those are the ones that I end up working on.
Okay, that's actually really great, I think, for many writers, because I think the biggest struggle for them is not being able to be stuck to one project for such a long time, especially if it's a universe. How do you deal with pressure that builds up around, if you have a story that screams at you to write it, I know it tends to scream very loud, and
yes.
you want to write it quickly, you want to write it fast. Obviously, you have to hold back a little bit to make it great, to write it correctly. How do you deal with pressure around that?
When I'm excited about a story, that's great. It's great to get started, but what always ends up happening is once I get into a story, the story starts to become bigger, the characters start to become real, and suddenly the characters don't want to behave.
Yeah.
They don't want to do what I want them to do. Suddenly they want to go off and do their own thing, and I say, no, 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 you have to do this. And then it just stops working. And then I realize, and I always have this same thing, is I kind of have a conversation in my head with the characters. And to figure out what their choices are, where they're going, what choices do they want to make. And if they don't want to follow the plot, I got to throw the story away and then follow the choices that they make. And then once I know the direction they're going, I stop and then I spend time reworking the plot based on the decisions the characters make. So the story is always changing. I don't stick to my outline because more important than the outline are the real world decisions that these characters would make. And I think that's what makes the stories more compelling, is that you believe these characters because the things that they're doing are things that real people would do.
I'm going to ask a little bit about research that goes into your books. Obviously, I know most of the research that went into Scythe went into probably researching death, I would guess.
Not really.
What was it?
Most of the research was looking at possible futures from a positive point of view.
Oh.
I spoke to AI scientists and asked them, we know what we're afraid of with AI. What do you hope for? What in your best vision of our future, what would AI be? I did a lot of research on medical science. What diseases are we close to conquering? What diseases, when do we think we'll have conquered every disease? And I did research into life extension and came to the realization that we're going to be surprised at how quickly we come to the point where we figured out how to end death. It's not going to be something in the far-fetched future. This is going to be like something that pops up on your newsfeed 3 years from now. So this is going to be, Elon Musk, has solved the mystery of aging, or Jeff Bezos. They're gonna, and suddenly they figured out how to be immortal, and now that's our new reality.
Yeah, you do something that is very scary to me and to many writers, which is co-writing, writing with another author. You wrote Dry with Jared, and can you tell me a little bit about the process? Because I can't imagine sharing a book with another person, but so many writers do it, and I'm curious in general what.
Well, I did a lot of collaboration with other authors before working with Jared, and the basic rule when I collaborate is, the rule is that in order for it to go into the book, we both have to like it. And that is the rule that we start with. So there's never any arguing over what works and what doesn't work. If I come up with something that I love, that I think is fantastic, and my collaborator says, doesn't work for me, boom, it's out.
Okay.
And no argument, no discussion. We have to both like it. And so that way, no one gets hung up on things, and no one emotionally invests in anything until you know that the other person's on board. And that has worked like a charm for every collaboration that I've ever done.
Okay. When you write with somebody, do you write absolutely separately and then you send the ideas over? Because I think my favorite collaboration between authors is Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett on Good Omens, and they wrote it in one room, which seems terrifying. Do you write separately?
It depends on the collaborator. When I'm working on this stuff that is for younger readers, which I work with my friend Eric Elfman, and basically we are trying to write like Douglas Adams or Terry Pratchett. We're trying to write science fiction that's funny. And so what we do is we work on a Google Doc, and we live 3,000 miles away from each other.
That's terrifying.
But we sit at our computer, we are FaceTiming live on our phones, and then we're in a Google Doc on the computer, and in the same paragraph at the same time. And so we'll sit on FaceTime and say, who's going to start today? And I say, okay, I'll start. And I start working on the paragraph, and then he'll trail behind me, making changes, making notes of suggestions. And then after a page or two, I'll say, okay, why don't you take over? And then he'll take over, continue from there, and then I'll trail behind him making suggestions. And so we work in real time together, and it's like being in the same room. Working with Jared was different. He didn't want me looking over his shoulder while he was writing. And so what we would do is we would sit together to plot the story out and figure out what was going to happen. And then we would decide who was going to take what chapters.
And the last question, also about other authors, kind of, because you have one world that you created by yourself completely alone, which is Scythe, and then in Gleanings, is it Gleanings? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You invite other authors from very different walks of life, I would say, because some of them write TV mainly, some of them write stories mainly, to write into that world. How did it feel to invite other people into a world that you created completely by yourself?
It was exciting. It was exciting to get the chance to work with other authors who I admire. And you know, when we first spoke, I told them, okay, so most of my job is going to be making sure that it works within the world. And like for instance, I wrote with David Yoon, who I love his writing, and when he came up with this story, I just sort of tweaked some of the things to make sure that it fit the mythology of the world. I changed the ending a little bit. I acted mostly as an editor for that particular story. Other writers, I really was hands-on collaboration with them. But everyone was a little bit different. But it was really fun to get the chance to write with other authors, and I hope to do it again.